All right, let's go ahead and go to the next chapter. The big idea. Like the main characters in a book, I was finally going to do something. I was going to read every book Mrs. Spencer and her friends had banned from the school library. I found the list in the newspaper in the library, just like Danny said. Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Matilda. Harriet the Spy. Wait Till Helen comes by. It's Perfectly Normal. From the Mix-Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. All the Junie B. Jones books by Barbara Park. All the Captain Underpants books. The Egypt Game. All the Goosebump books. It wasn't exactly 11 books like Mrs. Spencer said. It was more than 11 books when you counted all the gajillion Goosebumps books and the big shelf of Captain Underpants and Junie B. Jones books. I had already read 5 of the books on that list, if you count reading a couple of Goosebumps and a couple of Junie B. Jones. The others I'd read were Matilda, awesome, Harriet the Spy, awesome, and From the Mixed-Up Files, super awesome, of course. I'd never heard of It's Perfectly Normal or The Egypt Game, but The Egypt Game sounded especially good. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and Wait Till Helen Comes I'd seen on the shelf, but I'd never checked them out because they looked kind of scary, and I'm not a big fan of scary books. But I was definitely going to read Wait Till Helen Comes now. I hadn't read Captain Underpants either, and I didn't want to. Captain Underpants was silly. I would read that one last. The only book I was worried about was Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. I knew that book, of course. It was on the shelf right beside Judy Blume's other books, like Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, awesome, and Super Fudge, awesome. Shelbourne Elementary goes up through 6th grade, so some of the books in the library are for older kids. Are You There, God? Had a cover that said 6th grade to me, and I'd heard other girls whispering about it in the school bathroom, so I'd always stayed away from it. But I was resolved. I was going to read each and every one of the books Mrs. Spencer said I couldn't, just to spite her. I knew she'd never know, and that it wasn't like I was doing something that would help Mrs. Jones get the books back on the shelves, but I still felt a secret thrill at doing something an adult told me not to. That afternoon I emptied my piggy bank, not breaking it like Jamie did from the Mixed-Up Files, and counted it up. $21.76. That was enough for 2 paperback books at least. I asked Mom and Dad if we could go to the bookstore that night, and their reaction was exactly what you'd expect. Are you sure that's what you want to spend your money on? Dad asked. Why do parents always say that when you tell them you want to buy something with your own money? I knew what he really meant. He meant, I don't think that's how you should spend your money. Yes, that is what I want to spend my money on, I thought, and this time I actually said it. Mom and Dad had one of those silent conversations with their eyes again, and Dad sighed and said he'd run me to the bookstore after dinner. I need new shoes at the ballet store, Alexis said. Angelina hopped up and down. I want to go for frozen yogurt. I need to hit the office store, Mom said. If we left now, we'd just have time to grab tacos and do all 4. Suddenly, my trip to the bookstore had become a family outing. Before I could even think something I wasn't going to say, Dad was fishing for his keys out of the bowl by the door, and the dogs were barking and whining about us leaving. Alexis, Angelina, and I climbed into the back of our car. Angelina's car seat was in the middle. I squeezed into one of the other sides, pushing toys and Cheerios onto the floor. The whole car still reeked of spoiled milk from the drink Angelina had spilled a month ago, and before we had even left the neighborhood, Thing 1 and Thing 2 were whining. The sun is on me, Alexis said. I'm hot. You can sit on the other side when we leave the office store, Dad told her, which meant I was going to have to sit on the hot side in the sun. But no one cared about that. Amy Ann is touching me, Angelina whined. Mom, Amy Ann is touching me. Amy Ann, please don't touch your sister, Mom said. Her car seat takes up half the back seat. How am I not supposed to touch her? Amy Ann, Mom said. I crossed my arms and slouched against the car door, trying to get as far from Princess Angelina and her throne as possible. Now do you see why I never say anything? Nobody ever listens anyway. We're not going to be at the bookstore too long, are we? Alexis said. Not too long, no, Dad said. Not if we want to get all the other things done and be home before bedtime. Going to the bookstore was the whole reason we were going out in the first place, and now it was something we had to squeeze in so there'd be time for frozen yogurt. I closed my eyes and I took a deep breath. Didn't matter. I had enough money in my pocket for 2 paperbacks at least, and I already knew what books I wanted. Danny was going to loan me Wait Till Helen Comes, so I was going to buy The Egypt Game and It's Perfectly Normal, whatever that was, and I was going to read them both that very night. Next chapter, not a novel. So it turns out It's Perfectly Normal is not a novel. It's a nonfiction book all about dating, and Mrs. Spencer would say, with pictures. I was so embarrassed when I saw what It's Perfectly Normal was about. I had even asked somebody at the bookstore to help me find it. I could have died. As soon as I saw what it was, I put it back on the shelf really fast and ran away. I mean, there's stuff in there I do have questions about, and my mom and I have already talked about some of it, but I was not going to buy that book with my family right there. Instead, I bought The Egypt Game, which was a novel, and Scary Stories, a bunch of short stories, and I read them both that night. Wow, The Egypt Game was great. It's about these kids who build this pretend Egyptian altar in a creepy guy's backyard, and then mysterious things start happening, like maybe the Egyptian god is leaving them messages. I guess it got banned because someone didn't like that kids were worshiping Egyptian gods, even if it was pretend. And there's somebody attacking kids in the neighborhood too, which is kind of scary. But the book was really awesome. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, I read in the dark, in bed, which is a big mistake. Oh my gosh, I'm still shaking. There's a story in there called The Red Spot about a girl who has a spider crawl on her face. That's bad enough. Oh, but the spider bites her or something, and it leaves a big red spot on her cheek. Her mom said it'll go away, but it doesn't. And a few days later, it explodes, and 100 of baby spiders come crawling out of her face. And even worse, there are these creepy pictures. I called the dogs to come and sit with me in bed while I read it, but even that didn't help. In another story called High Beams, a woman driving a car at night can't figure out why the car behind her keeps flashing its high beams at her. It turns out that a bad guy had snuck into the back seat of her car, and the other driver saw it, and every time the bad guy rises up to attack her, the car behind turns on its high beams to stop him. Mom! Amy Ann still has her lights on and can't sleep, Alexis called, making me jump. Mom appeared at the door, looking tired. Amy Ann, you know I don't mind you reading, but Alexis needs to sleep, and you do too. I nodded and pulled down my blankets up high over me. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold my flashlight, but I still wanted to read another story. I turned to one called The Wendigo. It was about a man and his guide hunting in a part of Canada where nobody else ever goes. One night, the wind starts calling the name of his guide, and something comes swooping down out of the dark and snatches him up and flies away with him. The guide screams something about his feet being on fire, and then he's gone. The hunter splits, but later on, he's by a campfire when a strange man, wrapped up in a blanket, sits down next to him. The hunter is sure it's his old guide, the man who disappeared that night. The hunter can't see his face, and the strange man won't answer any of his questions. The hunter decides to lift a man's hat off his head, and underneath he sees... Mom! Amy Ann is reading with her flashlight, Alexis cried, and I screamed and exploded out from under my blanket. Alexis screamed because I'd surprised her, and the dogs went crazy barking like the mailman had suddenly appeared in the room, and the whole ruckus brought Mom running. What's going on in here? She asked. Nothing, I whispered, hugging Flot and Jet with both arms. Across the room, Alexis stared at me in horror. Mom frowned. Whatever's going on, I need lights out and for you both to go to sleep. I nodded and Mom left. I clicked my flashlight off and stuffed Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark under my mattress where I couldn't see it. I finally got Flotsam and Jetsam settled back down and pulled my blanket up over my head, but I knew I wasn't going to get any sleep tonight, or maybe ever again. Doesn't sound like a good story to read at bedtime. Okay, I will go ahead and read tomorrow another chapter. Have a good night, you guys.